Robert Redford was a man who seemed to have everything. The world knew him as the charming outlaw from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the clever con man from The Sting, and the golden boy of Hollywood who turned his fame into a platform to create meaningful cinema. He was admired for his talent, his vision, and his decision to stay away from the shallow glitter of celebrity life. But behind the quiet strength of Robert Redford was a secret tragedy that shaped him, a mystery he carried all his life, a mystery he never spoke about publicly, one that haunted him until the very end. In the summer of 1983, Redford was in Buffalo filming The Natural, one of his most celebrated roles. Everything seemed perfect. His career was at its peak, his family was thriving, and he had just started exploring more deeply the world of directing and producing. Then came the phone call that shattered his peace. His daughter Shauna's boyfriend, Sid Wells, had been found murdered in Boulder, Colorado. The news struck like lightning. Sid wasn't just some casual boyfriend. He had been close to the Redford family for years, a young man everyone adored. For Shauna, this was her world collapsing. For Robert, it was every father's nightmare. Reports said Sid Wells was only 22 years old, a journalism student at the University of Colorado Boulder. He was discovered face down in his own apartment, a fatal shotgun wound to the back of his head. The scene was horrifying. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle. Whoever had done this either knew Sid very well or had come prepared. The brutality of the murder shocked the entire community. He chartered a private jet to fly back to Boulder, determined to be with his daughter. What awaited him was not just grief but confusion. The police quickly identified a suspect, Sid's roommate, Thane Alan Smika. Smika was a troubled figure, struggling with finances, drugs, and mounting tension with Sid over unpaid rent. Some of Smika's acquaintances even claimed he had bragged about doing something terrible, something that sounded eerily close to a confession. Yet the case never moved forward. Evidence was deemed insufficient. No charges were filed, and Smika eventually disappeared, vanishing like a ghost from Boulder by 1986. For Robert Redford, a man who believed in justice and order, this was a torment. This was a life taken violently, and worse, there was no closure. Every day that passed without answers was another day his daughter lived with an open wound. Redford, protective and deeply private, rarely spoke of the case in public. Those close to him said he carried it like a silent weight, often thinking about Sid Wells and the cruel randomness of that day. Years turned into decades, but the murder of Sid Wells remained one of Boulder's most enduring cold cases. Redford quietly supported every attempt to reopen the case. He met with investigators, encouraged the Wells family, and kept hope alive that justice would someday prevail. The 1990s brought no new answers. But in 2009, there was a glimmer of progress. New forensic techniques gave the Boulder District Attorney's Office a reason to take another look. In 2010, an arrest warrant was finally issued. The authorities believed they had enough evidence now to charge him. But there was one problem. Smika had been on the run for nearly 25 years. He was nowhere to be found. For Redford, this was bittersweet. On one hand, the law had finally acknowledged what he and the Wells family had suspected all along, that Smika was the killer. On the other hand, justice was still out of reach. It was like staring at a locked door while knowing the key was just beyond your grasp. As the years passed, the hope of finding Smika alive began to fade. The FBI eventually joined the manhunt, even offering a reward for information leading to his capture. But Thane Alan Smika became one of those ghosts of American crime stories, a name whispered, a face that never resurfaced. Redford continued to work, continued to create some of the most iconic films of the next 3 decades. But those who knew him well say that this case left a permanent mark. He became more protective of his privacy, more careful about his family's exposure to the public. Perhaps that is why he never spoke openly about the case in interviews. Maybe he feared reopening the wound for his daughter. Maybe he felt that the media would turn it into a spectacle. Or maybe, as some believe, he simply could not find the words to describe the pain of living with an unsolved murder that hit so close to home. Even in his later years, after retiring from acting and stepping back from Hollywood, Redford would occasionally inquire about the case, making sure that it had not been forgotten. He wanted justice for Sid Wells, not just for his daughter, but because he believed in the principle that a killer should never walk free. When Redford passed away in 2025 at the age of 89, the case was still unsolved, but his death renewed public interest. The FBI once again called for tips, reminding everyone that the case remained open and that there was still a $10,000 reward for information leading to Smika's arrest. After decades in the public eye, Robert Redford was seen by the world as a man who had it all figured out. A legendary actor, a director who gave us stories with heart, and an environmental activist who fought for causes that mattered. But those who knew him closely said that the pain of Sid Wells's murder never left him. It was something that stayed quietly in the room like a shadow that followed him wherever he went. The unanswered questions haunted him. Why did it happen? Why was Sid's life taken so violently? And why, after so many years, was there still no justice? Shauna, his daughter, carried her own grief, but she also carried her father's strength. She rarely spoke about the tragedy in interviews, focusing instead on her art and her family. Robert respected that silence. He understood that not every pain needs to be shared with the world, but he kept the memory alive in his own way, quietly pushing for authorities to keep looking, to not let Sid Wells become just another name on a list of unsolved murders. Those who worked with Redford noticed that after 1983, there was a shift in his work. His films became more introspective, more focused on the quiet struggles of human life. Movies like A River Runs Through It and Ordinary People, which he directed, were not just beautiful pieces of cinema. They were meditations on grief, forgiveness, and the search for meaning after loss. Many critics believe that his own personal pain shaped the way he told these stories. He understood what it meant to lose someone and to keep living with that loss. His films became his way of processing what words could not express. Even as he grew older, Redford never stopped checking on the case. Whenever Boulder authorities reopened the investigation, he offered support. When the arrest warrant for Thane Smika was issued in 2010, he reportedly felt a quiet sense of vindication, but also frustration that Smika had managed to stay hidden. Law enforcement believes Smika might be living under a different identity somewhere in the United States, or perhaps even outside the country. The case was profiled on crime shows and podcasts, each one reigniting public interest. But Smika remained a ghost. As Redford entered his 80s, he became more reflective, often speaking about the importance of justice, accountability, and the responsibility we have to each other as human beings. Though he rarely mentioned Sid Wells's name, there was always a sense that he was speaking from experience. Friends said that he carried both sorrow and hope, sorrow for the tragedy that had touched his family, and hope that someday the truth would be brought to light. When news broke of Robert Redford's passing in September 2025, fans across the world mourned not just a great actor, but a storyteller whose work had shaped generations. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, and political leaders. But amid the celebration of his life, there was another conversation that quietly resurfaced: the still unsolved murder of Sid Wells. Media outlets revisited the story, reminding the public that Smika had never been caught. The FBI renewed its call for information, posting age-progressed photos of what Smika might look like today. There was a renewed push to bring closure to a case that had been open for more than 40 years. For many, this renewed attention felt like a final tribute to Redford himself, a chance to resolve the chapter that had remained incomplete in his life. The murder of Sid Wells was more than just a crime story. It was a piece of Hollywood history, a reminder that behind the glamour of the silver screen are real people who face real heartbreak. As the case gained fresh traction after Redford's death, some investigators expressed optimism that someone, somewhere, might finally come forward with the crucial information needed to find Smika. Technology has advanced since the 1980s. DNA testing, digital databases, and online tip lines have made it easier than ever to solve cold cases. There is still hope that justice might one day be served. Robert Redford's story reminds us that no one, no matter how powerful or famous, is immune to tragedy. His life was filled with success, but it was also marked by loss: the loss of a child, the loss of friends, and the haunting absence of justice for Sid Wells. And yet, Redford never became bitter. He used his pain to create art that inspired millions. He built Sundance into a platform that gave voice to independent filmmakers, perhaps because he believed that every story, even the painful ones, deserves to be told. Those who admired him say that this was Robert Redford's true gift, his ability to turn suffering into something meaningful. The tragedy that touched his family might have remained a private nightmare, but in some way it found its way into the stories he told. His characters were often flawed, searching, wounded, just like the people in real life. And in watching them, audiences found pieces of themselves and perhaps a little healing too. Today, as the search for Thane Smycke continues, there is a sense that finding justice for Sid Wells would also be a way of honoring Robert Redford's legacy. It would bring closure not only to the Wells family but also to Shauna, who lived through that terrible summer in 1983. More importantly, it would close a chapter that has remained open for too long: the Hollywood mystery. Robert Redford never spoke about was not a scandal, not a hidden love affair, not a secret feud. It was something far more human. It was the story of a father's pain, a daughter's heartbreak, and a family's long wait for justice. And that is perhaps why it is so powerful. It shows us that Robert Redford was not just a legend on the screen, but a man who endured the same kind of suffering that so many families face when justice is delayed. The mystery still lingers, and until the day Thane Smycke is found, it will remain one of Hollywood's most haunting unsolved cases. But maybe that is why it continues to capture public imagination, because deep down, we all want resolution. We all want the story to have an ending. Robert Redford may no longer be here to see that day, but the fight for justice continues in his memory. And perhaps one day soon, the truth will finally come to light, giving peace to the man who carried this burden for so many years. And as we close this chapter on Robert Redford's life, we are reminded of something deeply human, that even the brightest stars carry silent sorrows. Behind every smile, every performance, every legendary film, there was a father who never stopped hoping for justice, never stopped believing that one day the truth would be revealed. The murder of Sid Wells was not just a crime. It was a wound that shaped an entire family. Redford never used it for publicity, never spoke of it to gain sympathy. He carried it quietly with dignity and let his work speak for the pain he could not put into words. Maybe that is why we connect so deeply with him even now. Because we all know what it feels like to lose something, to wait for closure, to hold on to hope when the world gives you none. So tonight, as we remember Robert Redford, not just the actor, but the man, the father, the fighter, let us also remember Sid Wells and all the unanswered stories that still deserve justice. And if you know anything, if you've heard anything about Thane Alan Smycke, do your part, because one piece of truth could change everything. Until then, the mystery lives on.